Welcome to another edition of Across the Pond with George Kazolias and yours truly, James White, where we discuss the geopolitics in both Europe and the US from a global perspective and at times a local perspective. Topics we have for this week include the French pension reform bill that was signed by Emmanuel Macron, the elections in the Netherlands, where this new BBB party has taken 15 seats, which is more seats, I believe, than any other single party. And that points to a change in the way that the farmers are being treated, mainly in the Netherlands. Also, we have this situation with the drone that was taken down by the Russians, a U.S. drone that was taken down by the Russians. And breaking news is the imminent, as reported by Trump, the imminent indictment that's coming for him this week. So, George, you're the expert. You're in Paris. What's happening with this French pension reform?
Well, this is all about Macron, and it's all Macron's fault. I mean, Macron could offer everybody a free weekend at Euro Disneyland, and they would still burn tires and throw stones at police so much that he is disliked in this country. He has done everything wrong in this pension reform. He's tried to push it through like the autocrat he is. And people have to understand the first law that he had his majority pass. Now, he had almost an 80% majority with only 25% of the vote, but he passed a law which took the state of emergency out of the hands of Parliament and put it into the hands of the executive in a permanent fashion. In other words, Parliament had no more say in it, and it was permanent, not reissued every 6 months as it was intended to be. So he has absolutely not only autocratic powers, but one could say he could push it as far as dictatorial powers, because he can impose in a state of emergency all sorts of restrictions without going to the courts, without going before Parliament. And he has done so, especially against ecologists and against the yellow vests, where he used excessive force, in my opinion. So we are in a situation now where the people have said they've had enough of this autocratic rule. They want democracy. He tried to force this pension reform in without a vote, which Constitution allows him to do. And the people are saying, no, he doesn't have a majority in Parliament. That's why he tried to do it without a vote. And we are in a situation which could really, really grow out of hand rather quickly, because we almost went to our knees during the initial stages of the yellow vest movement at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, when he spent billions and billions and billions to buy off the poor workers who were protesting. I don't see how he's going to be able to quell this revolt, which it is, without one, either dissolving the Parliament, so there are new elections, which he will lose big time. He already doesn't have a majority. He will lose big time if there are elections, or calling out the police. And why not? We're in a state of emergency. Why not push it to martial law? I mean, it depends how bad things get. On Thursday, there will be major demonstrations. They're already this weekend. They shut down the refineries. The strikers have shut down the refineries, so we're going to be out of gasoline in the coming week. The trash is collecting like mountains in the streets of Paris. It's really a very dire situation, which could spin out of control very, very quickly. And so people should follow this. But let's not forget, this is Macron's fault. This is his behavior. It's his autocratic, almost very arrogant, almost dictatorial way of functioning.
I think there's another way to look at it, though, too. Granted, I don't have skin in the game. I don't have a French pension. And I do see that there are two sides to this story. obviously something needs to be done for people who work in physical labor professions that just aren't capable of working until they're 64 years old, doing hard labor. So there's got to be a way to deal with that. I mean, not all professions are equal in that respect. And
Agreed.
so something's got to be done about that.
No, I
On the other
agree.
hand,
But
it, on the other hand, I think that I would call this leadership. I mean, in a world that's so devoid of leadership right now, sometimes you have to tell the public what they don't want to hear. And because otherwise, the public's just going to demand everything all the time. And that's just an impossibility. So, I mean, this is an issue that does have to be dealt with. I think you might agree with that, but you just don't like Macron's way of doing it.
Well, I think he's provoked a rebellion when he didn't have to provoke a rebellion. Of course, pension reform is necessary in the system we are living under. Nobody demonstrating against the pension reform is demanding the communist dictatorship of the proletariat. What they're demanding is that, some of the wealth from the rich be redistributed. But that's not a solution either. So, yeah, I agree that reform is necessary. The problem is Macron just doesn't know how to do it. This is his third crisis, major crisis, since he was elected.
Well, he also, another interesting thing that happened with Macron over the past week is that he was severely rebuked in Africa, right? I mean, he lost his patience. What's your recollection of that, or your take on?
Well, as you know, I worked 35 years in and on Africa, and I know all these countries. And Africans today are in a position where they can tell the former colonizers to get lost. They have other avenues, other markets that they can deal with. And the Chinese and Russians are getting very big in Africa. And so Macron trying to lecture Africans really didn't go over big among Africans. And so it's clear that, the days where Paris or London can dictate terms to Africa are over. Let's take a Central African Republic, Burkina Faso, Mali, all have Wagner troops operating in those countries. They've replaced the French. The Chinese are big everywhere. There's a lot to say about that. We don't have time to go into it because I'm not a big fan of China, but
this is also linked with the loss of esteem for U.S. foreign policy around the world. I mean, the African countries are just nobody has any respect for the U.S. anymore. I mean, they just see us. We have such weak leadership right now, and we've been involved in so many wars, and we've acted like such a bully to other countries around the world, and they're fed up with it, and they don't fear going against the U.S. right now. The Saudis did it. The African countries are doing it now. India's done it. Obviously, Russia. So, the rest of the world is kind of lining up and is fed up with the way the U.S. has conducted foreign policy.
Well, one example of what you're saying is that when Zelensky wanted to speak to the African Union, 54 countries, they refused to hear him. They refused to do a live broadcast with I think only 4 of the 54 countries participated in the video conference with Zelensky. So the United States is being sidelined in Africa, as are the French and the British. Also, I might add, in Zambia, which was once a Bavarian colony, the visiting German minister was really put in his place in Zambia, told
absolutely
point blank, a live broadcast, you cannot lecture us. And you say, you want to talk about problems in elections and stuff? Go tell the Americans.
that was the comeuppance of the year, that
it
exchange.
was amazing. Yes.
Okay, so you've got Zelensky also wanted to take over the Oscars this year with his sales pitch, and was not denied that. Obviously, we've reached a turning point where even major news dailies are starting to let a little bit of the truth leak out about the disaster that's happening, the massive Ukrainian casualties that it came out this week that the Ukrainians don't even give casualty numbers to the U.S. To the CIA and the Defense Department. So, I mean, we're pouring $100 billion in there, and they don't even, give us the accountability of telling us, what the state is of this conflict.
I understand it's 113 billion American dollars until present, but who's counting, right? Then you have to add to that the Europeans and everybody else. It's an absolute disaster, and it's absolutely clear that Zelensky's going to lose this war. NATO's going to lose this war. Russia is advancing every day at its own pace.
Okay, interesting point on that. When we also mentioned the drone incident, and apparently there were two discussions, one between Lloyd Austin and his counterpart in Russia, and also Mark Milley and his counterpart, Shoigun, I think is the general's name. Now, supposedly this was a discussion about rules of engagement with drones and so forth. I wouldn't be surprised if there was also a discussion about like, yeah, well, where are we going with this? What kind of terms are you guys looking for if we were to end this thing? I mean, if that didn't come up, then I'd say, what they did talk about was mainly a waste of time. But
well, if that did happen, if Milei did talk about those things, then he's flying in the face of Biden and Blinken and the other warmongers in Washington, because they have made it clear that there's no compromise possible. People also have to understand that this drone was down 60 kilometers off of Sevastopol, which is in Crimea. In other words, it was very near Russian territory, and what it was doing was finding information on Russian positions in Ukraine and feeding targeting information, probably to American contractors manning the American weapons that were killing Russians. So it made perfect sense that the Russians would down that drone.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because anytime there's surveillance now, there's a link between the imaging and GPS coordinates. So anything that's being photographed is a potential target. In fact, I watched a really kind of disturbing video of Russian tactics where they had these unmanned aerial vehicles were flying over, and Ukrainian soldiers would fire at them and give away their position, and then they'd be targeted by mortars and artillery, and with devastating effect. It was like a video game.
Russian artillery has been wiping the Ukrainians out. I mean, it's like 10-1. The Russian artillery is just wiping the Ukrainians out. The casualties are horrendous.
It's amazing how many people are sticking to are stuck in a World War II mindset, where they're repeating things like the Russians are just sending human waves into the conflict, and I mean, it's total nonsense. If you watch a video like I saw, it's no, they're targeting the Ukrainians from afar, from a safe distance, and they're not risking their lives any more than they have to. I mean, now a large number of Russians have been killed, no doubt, but again, the Ukrainian casualties are just being concealed, and if the world really knew what that number was, I would estimate, I would say at least 200,000, maybe as many as 400,000 Ukrainians have died on the battlefield.
Well, I've heard the figure of 200,000 plus 400,000 wounded, many of them severely. But there's, like you say, there's no way to really confirm this, although it makes perfect sense given the forces at odds there. Which brings us to the other question of the International Criminal Court indicting Putin, which I find absolutely nasty from all different sorts of perspectives. One is
politically motivated. I mean, so let's trot out George Bush and Barack Obama first before we start going after Putin. I mean, there's a long list of
Let's start with
of
Putin too, and what he did in
well,
Serbia,
depends how far you want to go back. That's
Yeah,
all.
well, we have to go back to those who are still alive, right? I mean, Madeleine Albright is dead, so you can't go after her. Rumsfeld is dead, so we can't go after him. But you're right. Obama doubled the number of drone strikes in his first year in office from Bush. These people are all guilty of crimes against civilians, and it's inexcusable. But what it does is it shows, like you've said, it shows how right Africans and others in the South have been, saying the International Criminal Court has been set up by the West to go after our leaders and not their own. So it shows the political orientation and the
It,
control of this
yeah,
court by the West. And the other
it's
thing
this.
that, yeah.
It's the same problem with the UN.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the arm twisting and the blackmail used to get small nations like Tonga and Guatemala to vote in favor of America. I mean, it's absolutely clear for everybody to see who wants to see it that there's nothing, really democratic there. I mean, Lavrov has said, he was told by this country's ambassador or this country's ambassador, look, I have to vote that way, or they're going to hurt us with sanctions and other measures. So those UN votes don't mean anything. But I mean, this thing, and the other thing is really crazy, is that the United States doesn't even recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Yet they're all jubilating over that Putin has been indicted. And this could be a double-edged sword, because if they're going to go after the Russians, they're going to find out. Well, the Ukrainians have already put it online themselves before it was taken. I mean, the Ukrainians have constantly exposed their own war crimes, like shooting prisoners and so forth. Those videos were put online and stuff. So this could be a double-edged sword for the West as well. But I think that this action by the International Criminal Court is a sign of the desperation of the West in this war, especially in their fight for public opinion. And it's not going to work. The South is not going to fall for this.
It's pure politics. And speaking of politics, so let's go on to the Dutch election. So the elections were held in the Netherlands, and I guess it's the Senate. I'm not that
Yeah,
clear on how their
it's the Senate.
parliament
Yeah,
works, but
yeah.
in any case, I do know that this new party, the BBB party, which is the party of the farmers who are just fed up with all of the regulations that are being imposed on them that are really destroying their business, are just fed up, and so they won 15 seats, which I understand was more seats than any other faction managed to gain. And although I would also point out that if you combine the votes of the Greens and the whatever the left party is, the
Labor.
Socialist, yeah, Labor Party, those also equal 15. So there will be a battle, but I really felt for the farmers. I think that this exposes this, and the Ukraine war exposes the Greens for what they are. They're a combination of people who are well-meaning, but in some cases just delusional about climate change. Climate change, the climate is something that cannot be predicted. I learned that. I took a weather course with the U.S. Coast Guard, and I was amazed at how little I knew about the weather. But I came away with that with an understanding that the weather can change instantly, unpredictably, and with devastating consequences at any time. And that's just the fact of life of the weather. So you can't predict. You got a better chance of predicting the stock market than you do of predicting the weather patterns that are going to happen over the next 10 years. And another thing that's happening with that is that I saw that Greta Thunberg had to delete a tweet from 2018 where she was saying that, quoting some university professor, that we'd all be dead by 2023. Well, 2023 rolled around and we're still here. So she had to quietly, remove that. But Anything else to say about the Netherlands
Yeah,
elections?
I'd like to come back to that a second. What's really important is if they got elected with 15 seats in the Senate, it's because so many people who are not farmers voted for them too, just to show how fed up they were with Brussels, how fed up they were with the Prime Minister Rutte. It's a real shock for the established system, and it augurs badly for the future in parliamentary elections for the left and the centrist in Holland. They're also in a situation now, in a position where they can block EU reforms from Brussels on the agricultural thing. And the one thing that really surprised me, and I've read it in several different places, is that Holland is the world's #2 agricultural exporter. Can you believe it? I mean, I know they have these towers of pigsties and stuff like that, but the #2 after the United States, I mean, I read that in several different places. So you can see that economically, agriculture is also extremely essential
Right.
to the
So,
Dutch
so what
economy.
are the Greens going to eat once they destroy all the farms?
I
Where's the food going to come from?
don't have to ask them. I'm just trying to figure out, how Holland can be the world's second largest exporter of food after the United States. I'm telling you, I read it in the Guardian. I read it in, I think, the New York Times, a couple other places. I read it in the French press. I was, it's just amazing.
They're incredibly good at what they do. Somewhat related, I did see a story this week. I think it was in Euroactiv publication where it was celebrating the fact that because the German industry had been forced to cut back on energy usage, that they actually met the pollution targets that they otherwise, if business had continued as usual, they would not have been able to meet. So this was celebrated as a victory, and with the elephant in the room being that, well, yeah, that's great, but what about the loss of the German industry, the German production, the contribution to GDP, and uh, you know funding in the economy from exports, and all that is just completely irrelevant to these people. They're out to destroy uh, the system as it is, and they don't care who suffers. They're just ideologues who
Well, this week, Germany's finance minister backed out of the deal, the EU deal that was going to impose an end to combustion cars by 2035. And this is not, well, this has upset most of the Europeans, of course, but it's also upset the Greens in the coalition government, and it's really interesting because the automobile industry in Germany, I actually took notes this morning, is extremely important. And when you take the subcontractors, I think it's 1 in 5 people in Germany work for the automobile industry, directly or indirectly. It's its #1 export. Half the cars driven in Europe are German. And I mean, it's just amazing what the automobile industry represents in Germany. So obviously, and the other thing is that I understand that when you pass to these environmental cars, you're going to cut jobs by half, and so the Germans are also upset. Well, what are we going to do if half our labor force is laid off in this new technology without having prepared something else? So that's an important development for the for Europe in general, because the Germans are just going to block this deal. And I want to just add one little thing about this, is that this deal was decided in Brussels by unelected technocrats and was going to be improved by the Council of Ministers without Europeans having a word to say in this decision, a major decision.
Yeah, well, it had become very fashionable for politicians like Mark Rutte and Olaf Scholz to cave to the demands of the Greens, and I think now we're starting to see a backlash, and it's long overdue, frankly. I think one last topic that we had for today. There's breaking news that Donald Trump says that he's about to be indicted. And so obviously the people that have been after him for the last, I don't know, 6 years, they finally got an indictment out of it. Mueller couldn't do it for however many years he worked at it. But in any case, they've got their scalp. And there's going to be, I think there's going to be great satisfaction, from all the Trump haters to watch him taken out in handcuffs. But what's fascinating to me about that is the symmetry between the way that Trump has been prosecuted and harassed by the deep state and the FBI, the Department of Justice, and meanwhile, the Bidens are able to commit actually a lot of the crimes that have been tagged on Trump associates. The Foreign Advisor Registration Act, which, when you're representing a foreign country, you're required to register as a foreign agent, which the Bidens have not done. But meanwhile, they've taken millions. They took $3 billion at one point from a Chinese bank that went to a fund that was managed by Hunter Biden and his associates. So anyway, there's a long list of crimes, potential crimes that have been committed by the Bidens in influence peddling. And a lot of those things are coming to light now. There's a House committee that's looking into it, and there's also a Senate committee that's investigating. And so a lot of these things are coming to light. Of course, they've been in broad daylight for the past several years for anyone who cared to look into it. But I'm starting to, I have a crazy conspiracy theory maybe that the reason that Hunter Biden is continuously able to evade prosecution for what he's done is if the FBI established him as a confidential human source. In other words, if they set up a deal with him where they said, oh, well, you'll be one of the good guys and you'll work for us. So when you interact with all these, Chinese party officials, and what they're doing to infiltrate the U.S. You'll report to us, and that in that way you'll get immunity, and we'll protect you from any prosecution. This harkens back to the days of Whitey Bulger, who was allowed to commit crimes by the Boston FBI office for years, up to and including murders that were committed. They finally walked away from that deal, but this was, by the way, the Robert Mueller administered Boston FBI office that allowed this to go on for literally 10 years or more.
I can't speculate on any of this, James, and I'll wait to read the indictments and the allegations and see what kind of proof there is, and we can come back to it another time. But for the moment, for the moment, I'm not going to speculate on any of that. I have no information.
In any case, there's a tremendous symmetry between what's going on. I mean, the way that Trump and his associates are pursued by the legal means of the government, and the way that folks like the Bidens just escape and they're able to do whatever they want, and everybody looks the other way. So there's a striking difference, and Americans, I think, a portion of Americans at least are starting to recognize that there's a disparity. So I guess that about wraps for today. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention on this?
No, that's fine. We'll be back next week.
Okay. All right. Then I will say, a bientôt und auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.